welcome everybody to another episode of History's Benchwarmers. You are again greeted by me, Adam, and
me, Rich.
And we got a pretty interesting podcast for you today. So, we're actually going to be focusing on a series for the next couple of podcasts. We're going to be focusing mostly on the preconditions for European colonization. So that means we're going to be focusing on Spain, Great Britain, and France, and kind of the different factors that led into them expanding into the colonial empires that they later were known for.
So this is episode 1 of this colonization and establishment of the United States. So I guess our focus for this, this series is U.S. history from like colonialization in the 17th century going into the 1800s. Going into the year 1877. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a kind of a broad spectrum that we're trying to look at. But we also want to make sure that we cover enough of history because we are history's benchwarmers. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, like Adam said, we are starting to look at these preconditions for European colonization. And in accordance with the Spanish model, Spain was looking for an expansion of trade and wealth. Adam was mentioning to me earlier, before we started this podcast, that Spain just reunited under the Reconquista.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Spain had literally brought the two houses that were kind of conflicting with each other, but conflicting with the Moors in the south that had been depleting. That had been something since I think the 13th century had been established in Spain. So almost about 200 years of rule.
So what was the Moor? Who were the Moors?
So the Moors were Muslim Berbers from Morocco coming over and conquering Spain. They did so all the way up to, I believe it was the Battle of Tours. I think it was the Battle of Tours. That is where Europe stopped Muslim expansion into furthering in Europe. They had conquered all of Spain by that point. And if it wasn't for France and the other kings at that time coming together, maybe Muslim expansion could have gone all over into Europe. So with the Reconquista, it is getting back the establishment of the church and the necessity for order during that time. And so they were kicking out anybody who wasn't a Catholic. So during that time...
which led to the Spanish Inquisition.
Right. So, after the Reconquista and the Spanish Inquisition, we now have a united Spain under Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. And they have a new opportunity that's coming to their door. Now they have reestablished this new Spanish kingdom. They now have to figure out how are they going to become more powerful like the other countries on the European stage.
Yeah, well, and having this united kingdom led to this huge growth in population and urbanization. And that was due to agricultural revolution happening in Spain. Because the Muslims were able to create calendars and follow lunar cycles and created new tools that further expanded farming, that it eventually led into Spain, where Spain started to apply all of these things, which led to a boom in population. Having a bigger population means that you need more trade because you are not going to be able to provide your people with the same amounts of things that they actually need. And also by having more food, you're able to trade that food for, better weapons or whatever they needed at that time or whatever they wanted. So by having this bigger population, they needed a way of expanding their trade, and with expanding trade, you're expanding your wealth. So they found that gold was, kind of the best thing.
Yeah. Totally agree. And we are focusing more now the separation from that feudal kingdom to a more centralized state. And
yeah, well, like you're saying, there was finally a united kingdom.
right,
The Moors were gone, and now the king and queen were just like, hey, we need to get together. And during this time, we also have to understand that the Renaissance was going on.
oh yeah,
It was a huge rebirth and rediscovery of, inner consciousness, of your mind, of the human self that was separate from what the Middle Ages believed, which was centered purely around theocratic beliefs.
And you know what's really crazy about that? European trade had now started to become more focused on the waters. Now the Mediterranean, obviously they had been using ships for centuries to travel all around. But now they're traveling farther. Almost 10 times the distance. From France, or from the Netherlands even, all the way to India. Going all the way to the south tip of Africa and coming back. And then taking that ship and going to China and going to Japan and coming back. Now there have been, like I said, short trade between the Mediterranean from Spain to where Jerusalem is, to Italy, from where Egypt is. It was easy trade then. But now it's being more expansive. Because they're not going to the Arabs as the middleman anymore. Because who could travel through all that desert? Europeans couldn't do that.
Nope.
But the people who were living in that area could. And they said, for a sliver of what you're going to give us, for like a sliver of what you're sending, we get a little bit of it. That's how they got rich. Because they were the middleman. But then the Europeans during the Renaissance were more focused on what can we do? It was a rebirth and rethinking of things.
Yeah, it was less emphasis on mystical being like religion, being
Yes.
around God. It was more on what was observable in the world today, or at that time. Looking at math, expanding their mind on art, creating these inventions of just, that's what Assassin's Creed was entirely based on.
Yes, that's a great game series. Awesome game series. But, yes, and it's really interesting to think about what happens when you can already see the cracks start to happen within the church at that time. And to have more of a falling back. But it's interesting, though, because as we can see that this conflict is going on during the Renaissance, one of the most important things in the 3 G's of the Spanish kind of motto that a lot of historians have coined is gold, God, and glory. Those are the 3 main things that they really had their mind set on when they were expanding to go trade. And when the New World was discovered by Christopher Columbus,
Quote unquote discovered.
quote unquote discovered it. I don't like the word discovered. I like found for the Europeans. I feel like that's a better phrase to say.
But I mean, if you say found for the Europeans, we know that the Nordic people, the Vikings, were in Canada a couple hundred years before that. So,
But they never went as south as Christopher Columbus did. The Caribbean.
okay, but to say that the New World wasn't, I mean,
It wasn't
was new.
explored.
It was newfound information to the rest of Europe.
So do you think that Christopher Columbus knew that these Nordic people had done that?
I don't know.
Because there's a lot of pagan writings. They've burned them all. But that's besides the point. What is really supposed to be understood is that Christopher Columbus now had gone there for the first time with Portugal's money. And now he's saying, look what I have. Look what I have brought from this new area that no one's been before, quote unquote. Not quote unquote, but that I have found India. I have found, Japan. I have found China. I have found a way quicker than going through South Africa. Later we realized that it's the Americans. And then Spain's like, well, what did you bring? You brought slaves, you brought food, and you brought gold. They didn't care about the people, they didn't care about the food. They cared a little about the food and spices, what they can get, but they cared about the gold. Because that whole Reconquista, that was expensive. And you need to make sure that your pockets are full if you're going to be a big player on the European stage. So now Spain has to be like, there's gold there, we need gold. We need money. Go and find it for us.
Yeah.
Take as many people as you need, but we need to conquer this area and take that gold.
Siri popped
Damn
up.
it, Siri.
Yeah, and under this concept of, needing to find gold, I think the Spanish also realized that there was a finite amount of wealth in the world, and I think their goal was to get as much of it as possible.
Oh, yeah.
And that concept is called mercantilism.
Yes.
There's a finite amount in the world, and I need to have it all, is what the Spanish were saying.
Spain had this idea, and it was crazy because a lot of these European countries had this idea too, and we'll talk about that when we talk about France and Great Britain. But there's a zero-sum game that the wins, the gains and losses of your of what you have is balanced by the gains or losses of another participant. So if Spain were to lose something, well, that's okay because France lost just as much, even more. So now it's all right.
No, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's a justification of, hey, Spain's going to go to this new world. We're going to go take what we can get from the quote-unquote Indians, and that's their gold. And our win is justified by their loss. And it's a way of saying it's okay because it needs to be balanced.
Ooh, that's a crazy thing.
And I think that's what this specifically means. They're, tying in that zero-sum game into mercantilistic ideals. And realistically, I think that was this concept of for gold, God, and glory. That's the first steps. Going into the next step of looking at God, the role of the Catholic Church played a huge influence in Spain's.
Oh, yeah.
In Spain's monarchy, in Spain's colonialization and their imperial empire.
But, it's crazy because it was connected to the Catholic Church. France was like that too. But the problem was that later kings in France, like Louis XIV, were saying, I am more important than the church. So everybody at this point was like that. Everybody really used the church as kind of like their justification to do things, to spread the Christian faith.
But also you have to remember why the church was really pushing this right now too. Like, the church realizes, hey, we're losing ground.
Yeah, they know that.
But also, you have to also look at what was going on. The whole Protestant Reformation was happening, or it just finished happening.
It was just happening.
So, you had Martin Luther go and nail these theories to the 95 theses on the door of a church in Habsburg, right?
In Westphalia. No, where was it? I think it was in Westphalia because they named the treaty after that.
Okay,
I think it was Westphalia.
He wanted to nail these theses on this door, and this started a whole different thing where it's just like, hey, the church should not have more power than God. Is essentially what that was saying.
But we should also keep in fact that Calvinists came before Lutherans.
Yes, and I'm not arguing against that.
No,
I'm saying like, this was what was going on in the world.
Right.
So the Catholic Church realized, hey,
because he used it, yeah.
If the Spanish realized that there's a finite amount of wealth in the world, I think the Catholic Church then also realized, hey, there's a finite amount of souls in this world, and we need to be the ones who have it all. So looking at this role of God and gold, mercantilism applies to both of those concepts, meaning, the Spanish were looking for gold. They were looking for the finite amount of wealth to have for themselves, while the church, realizing the influence of the Protestant Reformation, said, hey, there's a limited amount of souls in the world, and I need to have them all. So, backed by the Spanish conquest, the church piggybacked them, going into the New World. Because if you look at a country like Mexico, 80% of the country's religion is Catholic.
That's insane. And South
Almost
America.
every country in Latin America speaks Spanish.
Yeah, except for Brazil.
There's a couple countries, but you look at that concept of this of mercantilism. This was definitely a precondition for Spain and for the Catholic Church. And then going into the third concept of glory, it's for king, for country, and for self. These conquistadors did not care about themselves first. They put their king first. Then they put their country. And then they built their self. That's like, yeah, then it's me. So I'm going to go over here and fight these people, take their gold, and enslave them for my king. I'm doing this for the betterment of my country. And look, while all this is happening, I'm going to line my pockets and get rich. That's the beginning of nationalism too. When Dr. Kohler talked about the rise of the state in the class, this is also part of nationalism.
I think that saying nationalism is a big step.
But the beginning stages of it, not nationalism itself. But look at king, country, self. You're putting your king, your leader, and your country over yourself.
But the thing is, with nationalism, you're not putting your leader. You're putting your ethnicity in there, which is hard at that time because Spain was now mixed with Muslims, Jews, people who had converted. I mean, people that have been mixing relations throughout this whole time.
But that's why king is first. Because that was the unitary force. Or the unifying force, not unitary, I'm sorry. Well, it was unitary. But that was a unifying and unitary force that brought the country together, was that monarchy. You can't have a sense of pride in your own country and your nationality.
But see, that's the thing. Because
it was mixed.
It's easier to say that in Europe because it's like, well, people in France. It's hard to say that because remember how Professor Kohler would say that people in the northern part of France and people in the southern part of France speak a different kind of French, a different dialect?
Yes.
So they, like I said, it's hard to say that for Spain during that time or anywhere in Europe for that time because people, even today, still consider themselves, well, yes, I'm German, but I'm from this area, I'm from that area. There's places in Germany where the German is very different. Just like in the Arab world, the way Moroccans speak, the Egyptians speak differently. But they know, like, oh, I know where you're from based on how you say things. I'm pretty sure that's the same thing how it is in Latin America.
Yes, it is. But that's not what I'm arguing here. That's not what
You're
I'm
arguing
saying.
about nationalism. But
I'm saying
there's
it's
so
the
much
beginning steps of nationalism.
Right, but what I'm saying is that there's still, like, yes, we have a king and a queen, but we also still have our nobility.
Yes.
That we are responsible for our area.
But the conquistadors, yes, having that, which is why they put the king first. The king was that unifying force that brought them together under the Spanish crown. Because then it goes king, country, and then self.
More importance on how much land you had than how much money you had. Because with the more land you have, the more area you control. And if you control more areas than other people, then you must have more power, which means you can grow more things, which means you have more money. But to get more money and to get more respect, you needed more land. And so Spain, like all the other European countries, thought that now we have this open space that nobody owns, except for these Native Americans. These people that are living here. But we have muskets, and they have swords and bows. So now we can come, take their land, and take as much land as we can, because the more land, it means we have the more resources. That mercantilist idea that there's not that much out there, we don't know how much is out there. It's probably not a lot. I need it, and I need it now. So then we go back to the actual voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492. In October 12th of 1492. I think one of the most important things is when you look at an old map during this time, Spain and Portugal were flooding Central and South America. Flooding it and conquering it. Spreading the religion, spreading disease, killing off the natives, and using them as slaves, while also importing African slaves to help in their endeavors. That they split that land in half. They literally drew a line down what was already left of there, and they said, well, from here to here, what are we going to do? They literally drew a line straight down, and they say, this side is Spain, And this side is Portugal.
Yeah, and this was actually called the Treaty of Tordesillas by Pope Alexander VI, who was also Rodrigo Borgia, an extremely influential and interesting person who probably should not have been Pope. He had 4 kids. So, kind of insane. But he decided to split up the New World between Spain and Portugal because of his ties back to the Spanish crown. Giving the Spanish crown more territory than what he gave to Portugal.
Right.
Because also what we have to understand about Italy at this time, Italy was also these nation states that were divided up, and the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church, was its own state.
But then you also have to think that Portugal also has trade in India. Spain doesn't.
True.
So even though they didn't get a lot, they still got something. Brazil is huge. It's huge. And all you need is just the port cities. That whole coastal area, man. Think about it. If Spain wanted to get to the other side of South America, they would have to go around. Down all the way south and back up to get to the other side. Or try to find territory before the port, that Portugal didn't control. You know?
Yep.
It was very difficult at that time. And now we have a split up in Central and South America with Spain. And I think that's pretty good for talking about Spain for the most part. I just feel like we can talk more.
I mean, the last point that I really want to hit on, after Spain had already colonized, the model for colonization has to deal with the size of Spain. That's the mania for precious metals, looking for gold. The demographics of the country and what it was. The religion being Roman Catholic, also piggybacking going into the New World. And how influential it was on these absolutist kings,
It was so. It's interesting because the more that we see that Spain expands into Central and South America, we see that idea of that it's not a self-governing, like you are not your own entity, you report back to the King of Spain. So we do have this absolutist regime going on.
Yeah.
And that's why they come up with these names for the people, like the native people, black slaves, people who are half and half, who are half
Mestizos.
Spaniard and mestizos, and then we have people who were born in Central and South America, but they're Spaniard.
Yeah.
And they never saw Spain because they were born in the New World.
Wow, what was the word called for them?
Creoles.
It wasn't Creoles.
I think it was like what was it?
Well, but these people who were born there and who were Spanish, were part of this system called an encomienda system, where they were the stronger people that had to protect the quote unquote weaker people, so the native people, in exchange for services. Essentially creating them and forcing them to be slaves, finding them gold.
Right, a protection system.
Yeah. They were like an early mob.
Kind of, yeah. But you're in the New World.
Yeah.
And the country and Europe is far from America. Like, there is a big ocean dividing us. Now with planes, it's a lot easier, but these people were traveling on wooden boats. And people died of all types of things. They said that if they were to send a slave boat, and those were, packed to the gills. If they were to take them from Africa to the New World, I forgot the numbers, but I think it's like well over 25%. Way more, I'm pretty sure. I can't think of the exact numbers. Would die just from the trip alone. It was a long journey for them to get all the way over there. And so now these people who are born there, but they're Spaniard, and they're now born in this new country, in the New World, and they're now the ruling class people, why listen to a country that's far away from you? So this idea that we later figure out that the colonists had already been kind of filtering, going in this idea of, or in the 16th and 17th century that we'll later talk about, that after a couple of generations of people living on these in the New World, why should we be caring about what Europe has to control over us? So I know that that's something that we definitely focus on because it's American history. We have to understand that all the other European powers kind of had the same idea, except for France.
France is late in the game.
France is very... you know what, man? When we talk about France, I have a lot on it because I always wanted France to just... They were always the bad guy. They were always pictured as the bad guys since the 15th, from the 16th century onward. They were just the bad guys. All the way up until World War I and World War II. And then they were looked at as good guys. Well, the 7 Years' War was fought over France and Prussia. Prussia literally faced Russia, Austria, France, all by them, and Sweden, all by themselves. And England was like, here, take this. But France is a topic for another time.
Yes, it is.
But is there anything you feel like needs to be said more about Spain?
No, I think we hit Spain pretty good. And if there's anything that you think needs to be corrected by us, or you think that we are wrong in any aspect, please leave us comments in the comment section, and we can address those as need be.
So thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you next time. Peace!